Welcome to this last session of the Dubai Future Forum. My name's Chris. I'm going to be your moderator for today. My job is to get out of their brains all of the intelligent stuff they have to share with us. So I'm not going to be talking that much. So today's session, we're going to be talking collaborative foresight. How can we create strong, lasting connections? We're going to have about 35 minutes of conversation with these three lovely people, and then we're going to be opening up for questions, any queries that you might have from the audience. But let's get cracking, shall we? We're going to be thinking about how collaboration can move beyond foresight processes into real-world decisions and relationships. So we're not just going to be asking about how do we do foresight. You're all experts. You've all practiced foresight. We're going to be thinking about where does it make a difference? What capabilities and relationships make it last? So we're just going to jump straight into some questions for David, for Geci, and for James. I'm going to start with David. The first question to all of you, we're going to keep this one quite short, is why does collaboration matter in foresight today? So what problems does it help us to solve? David, you're first up.
Sounds good. So two-part question. The first, I would actually say collaboration matters so much that, in fact, actually it should be our first sort of instinct to be collaborative in terms of the way we approach foresight. In terms of the why it's needed, I think there's really sort of different levels. So within an organization, so I come from the private sector. I'm at a startup right now, but before that I was at SAP, led an insights research center there. And so within the organization, it's a way of building consensus, right? And that's critically important, especially when you have a lot of people that don't know much about foresight, but you're trying to sort of use it with them. But then most brands are, in fact, actually networks of businesses. And so collaborative foresight is a way to create shared vision within that community, whatever that looks like. But then I would say, you look at the global issues we're facing, the only way we're going to address those is through collaborative approaches. And collaborative foresight is critical to creating shared visions for that.
Okay. So consensus is a key aspect.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's move over. Geci, same question.
Is this where we begin the debate?
Absolutely. Please.
Okay. No, I would say maybe not consensus, but the future as a commons requires that there is collaboration. And that commons may not be one where we have to agree on everything, but if we're going to be there together, then hopefully we participated and collaborated in thinking about those futures. Otherwise, we're actively defuturing those who don't get to be involved. Not just in the sense of them not being present in those futures, but not even having the space to imagine and to have a word into how we get there. So I think if we see the futures as a commons where everybody has a right to be and perhaps to be in different ways, then collaborative foresight becomes really important.
Okay, so a seat at the table, knowing where the table is, what the table looks like. And
if you want a table at all.
If you want a table at all.
Yeah.
Fantastic. James, over to you, sir.
Hi, everybody. I think for me, I break it down into two elements. There's the collaboration you do as you build your analysis and you get that foresight work, or you build your scenarios, whatever it is. And then there's the collaboration, you bring people together to act on it. And for me, the really key thing is how you generate action from your work. Policy change, legislation, whatever it is, how do you get to action? And if you do it collaboratively and you engage people in that process, they're much more likely to act on it because they've got stake in the game. So very often, we'll interview senior leaders or we'll convene senior people who are empowered to talk about the foresight and say, what are you going to do? Because that's how you actually get action on the future. There's no shortage of analysis in this space. But I think there's much more we could do on the action front. Okay.
All right, so action, consensus building, a commons. But let's roll it back a little bit. We talk about collaboration a lot, don't we, in the foresight space? And I know from my own experience, people sometimes dress collaboration up as we're going to do this thing regardless. And you're going to work together. Whether you like the person or the organization or not, this is what's going to happen. In other instances, you have that melding of brain cells and values and cultures and so on and so forth, and collaboration can be something quite creative and quite beautiful. But I wanted to roll it back a little bit and understand, what does collaboration actually mean to each of you? What does it mean for you in your work? Is it something that's a challenging concept, or is it just very clear collaboration means X, Y, and Z?
Oh, I mean, it can be challenging to make a successful collaboration for sure,
Sure.
right? And I think you need to think through the dimensions to make that happen. But collaboration for me is beyond just sort of like a workshop. It's beyond just sort of like people showing up and being forced to participate. If you've curated it the right way, you've put people together that are creating a shared understanding of the issues and the challenges that are before them, hopefully creating a shared vision. And seeing your role in that vision is critical, right? Like it's not one vision and everyone just better adopt it, but it's more of you're aiming for a vision where everyone feels present in it, and then in a dream world you're getting to a place where there's shared action or application, right? At different levels, whatever that might look like.
And just a follow-up question then. So in a corporate environment, of
Yeah.
which you've got plenty of experience, how do you distinguish between genuine collaboration from managed participation?
That is well, so it's not always easy to distinguish.
Sure.
Right, fair enough. You're aiming clearly for collaboration, and I think it really comes down to the way you design it. So we often spend a lot of time thinking about the practice of foresight and the methodologies within a collaborative foresight project. That's important. But I think there's when you get into a collaborative space, there's three other dimensions you really have to think about. The first one is you actually have to align on the problem. It doesn't mean that everyone everyone has the same agenda, because people can have very different agendas. But the problem, everyone's agenda, if you like, needs to be represented in the problem in some way. So you have to spend a lot of time thinking about how you align on the problem. The second is you need to create confidence in the process. In the corporate world, there's a lot of people that still question. There's lots of foresight teams. Within the corporate world, but there's also a lot of skepticism, frankly, about foresight as a methodology, right? Whereas, they prefer to go to more traditional insights or forecasting or those kinds of approaches. So you actually have to spend a fair bit of time convincing them that they should have confidence in what we're doing here. And then the third one is you have to curate the people. And you got to spend a lot of time. So you're not just curating the right set of experts to help you generate insights, but you also want to curate the right people in the room so that they can help apply those insights, whether that's in decision making or elsewhere. So they're slightly different, but they're fundamentally critical. And if you don't get that right, I mean, you'll always have people showing up that it's just managed participation, but you're trying to minimize that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks for that, James.
On that one, I think it's such a skill of facilitation. I think if you can facilitate and hold space and make people engage in the process, I would say, that would be probably my main one, is if you can cultivate your skill of facilitation, especially, so where I work in the Cabinet Office, we have an organisation, 500,000 people, lots of different organisations. I think we have to collaborate by default, because I often tell people in the Cabinet Office, I don't really know anything. All of the expertise on these topics is out in departments. So I need to be able to interview and aggregate all this expertise. I need to be able to facilitate. I need to be able to spot the patterns across these different teams, spot the compounding problems, find where there's divergence between people's views, find where there's a knock-on effect to an issue, and perhaps one department hasn't realized how impactful what they're doing could be on another part of the system. And I think you have to be collaborative and you have to be a good facilitator. I'd also say facilitation is a really good skill for AI proofing your career. I think it's going to be a while before we replace Chris with an AI.
I'm not so sure about that. I'm pretty simple chap. But what does collaboration itself mean for you?
What does it mean for me?
Yeah.
I think it's about finding common ground in the system if you can. I think it's about convening and holding space, and I think it's about identifying the motivations of your target audience and then bringing people together around that so that they engage.
And how do you decide who's in and who's not in? Like what does that look like for you?
So I think I mentioned the Cabinet Office, big organisation, 500,000 people. But within that organisation, I have brilliant insight. So sometimes, if you're trying to find, to your point about where is Foresight? Sometimes the people who I look for when I'm looking for my Foresight counterparts in the system work in risk, they work in strategy, they work in policy, they work in analysis. So sometimes it's just a challenge to find people in a big system because the vocabulary is different across a big system. But one thing we do have in the UK, we've got a brilliant network of academics. We've got some great international companies. So we can often bring, using a really broad, diverse network of people across the private sector, departments, academia, also our embassy network. If you're working in a government, you've got this network of embassies around the world who can tell you what's going on. But we need to draw that insight back, and then we would need to work out what it means for the priorities of the government. So I think we cast the net wide. There are sometimes issues with sometimes some restrictions about what you can share with all those stakeholder groups, and there might be national security reasons that you don't want to bring in, everyone into the room at certain times, or, to be honest, oftentimes when we use scenarios in government, you've got to be. There's almost an issue with leak risk if you're dealing with a really juicy scenario. That could play out in a different way if that it gets into the papers. It could be, the government's preparing for this thing. When we're not preparing for it, we're exploring it. But there's a leak risk there. So you try and be as collaborative as you can, but there might be restrictions to who you can bring in and when. Or you might end up, oftentimes a lot of governments around the world will do maybe some public-facing foresight that they can show the world to demonstrate how they are thinking longer term, and then maybe a private version that they keep internally that might have some different detail in it. But I'll stop there.
I know you're on a roll, but I do want to turn over to Geci. Same question. What does collaboration mean for you, to you?
And maybe to locate myself in terms of where I'll answer that from. I'm an academic and working a lot with communities as well, and also very much in this kind of north-south C-suite communities kind of distance. And I think from that position, I would probably describe collaborative foresight as requiring the co-authorship of those futures. And that's probably got to do definitely with the facilitation, but also with the way the whole exercise is set up in the first place. Why are you doing this foresight? Is this extractive in the sense that all you need is data from them to feed what you're doing? Or is this about consumption? You want to convince them of something, so we're going to craft some features and give them to you. Or is it about something more shared? And I think the word shared has been used in both cases. And if it is something more shared, then there's got to be something that's co-creating in that space. And there's got to be that sense that people have a say, even if it's one you don't necessarily understand, even if you have to adapt the methods you're using because you're not fully being able to engage. And so the idea that, I think the co-authorship, the actual genuine sharedness, I think that's very important for me in what would be collaborative foresight.
So that's a really tough space to hold, isn't it?
Yeah.
Balancing all of those different perspectives, different power dynamics, and different expectations, I imagine. Can you talk us through where you see this working really well, and what you've learned from really good examples where there is that co-authorship, perhaps co-design, co-identification of problem sets and decisions that need to be taken?
Yeah. So maybe two. One is an example of where it's worked and one where it absolutely hasn't.
Absolutely.
I think one where it's worked is we were involved a number of years ago with actually a philanthropy in the north that wanted to do work. And initially it was very extractive work. It was about collecting data, but for good reasons, collecting data because you want to develop innovation programs and you want to understand what to offer. So we want to get an idea of what people want and how people are thinking about the long term. So that's how it began. But I think as they began to do that and as people began to push back a little bit, because even when you think you're helping, people have many concerns and their concerns are not only the thing you're working on, and it becomes difficult because often people come in with a fairly narrow mandate, but to communities who have many interests actually, and not just, maybe you want to do just agriculture, but now they're raising health, and you're not there to do health, very little you could do about it, so what do you then do? And what that spun off to actually is a platform we built called Foresight for Development, and what they did was to seed fund the development of the platform that could take on at least create a space where those other issues could be explored, where people could begin having the conversations they wanted to have that exceeded the mandate at present. And I think what that was about was taking responsibility for the fact that, yes, you had something clear and good that required foresight, but these people's foresight is not about the single issue that you're trying to explore. And what do you then do? In that case, they're philanthropy, they've got money, and they were able to assist with money. That's not always the case. But I think that was a good example of understanding that you may have to go beyond the thing you thought you were doing if you are genuinely co-authoring something where you're not there to tell people, stop that.
Right.
I thought that was good. I think what was not so good, we began a project a number of years ago called the Capacity to Decolonize. The capacity to decolonize was about the capacity to decolonize futures and futures thinking, and what would it look like for people who wanted to support such a space. What worked wonderfully was the co-design of the capacity to decolonize. We developed a wonderful project with 30 people from around the world, great ideas about how we could work differently with funders and communities and futurists and all of that. There's a wonderful website, it's still up there, go look at it. What failed terribly is that everybody, including the people who funded that work, couldn't actually work in those ways. It's really difficult to do genuine collaborative work, especially from the power position, from the interest, whether it's the government or the philanthropy or whatever, because it would require you to completely upend how you've set up to work in the first place. You would have to fund differently, you'd have to relate differently, you'd have to cede power positions that, in fact, are the very basis of how you relate. These are not easy things to do, and so in a way, maybe just to say collaboration isn't easy.
Difficult to do those things, but not impossible.
Not impossible. I mean, I think there's small examples, and I think we have to continue experimenting with those spaces if we want to do this difficult work.
Thank you very much. And can you talk us through, does collaboration change when community ownership is the starting point? Like, what can that look like?
Well, so there was a philanthropy session on the pre-workshop day one. And in that, one of the comments that a lot of people stated was time, that part of the problem is that you've got time. You've got time to a policy process, or you've got time to a project that one is doing. And the problem is that it's very hard to decide how much time the collaboration is going to take because you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And so your one-year project timeline or your three-year policy horizon may not be how much time it takes. So again, going back to the capacity to decolonize, we proposed that you wouldn't know for a minimum of 5 years what people were actually going to do. This was an impossible condition for many people to accept. But I think as futurists, we talk a lot about time, but I think we're not really serious about how much time we think it might take, and we're not very flexible about time. And my pet topic, which is different conceptions of time. So 5 years for some people sounds like a hideously long time. For other people, it's a blink of an eye. And then you can get that time back. I always say time catches up with you, so it's fine. It doesn't matter. If I'm late, it's okay. We'll still be fine. But yeah, so I think that's one of the things that we've really got to think about is if you really want to collaborate, you may have to rethink how you're thinking about time.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I think time is something that I feel is kind of traded sometimes for foresight, isn't it? Like with all of the, with some of the decision makers, there's so much cynicism around, what is this foresight thing? What's this futures thing? Why is it different to X, Y, and Z? And then you almost sometimes find yourself saying, well, it's not going to take too much time, just so you can get your foot in the door. Yes. And then lo and behold, it could be a year later. And hopefully along the way, they've discovered, this futures thinking and foresight, and we've converted them, and excellent. But it is a commodity, isn't it? Depending on how you view it. But so if we moved into the practice of collaborative foresight, David, you've got so much experience in parts of the private sector. I don't want to describe it as one big homogenous lump because it's not. There's much diversity in that sector. What have some of the digital platforms that you've worked with how have they helped to genuinely expand participation in foresight processes?
Yeah, actually, I think I would say not particularly well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I actually think that when you look at most platforms and tools that are created, they're actually created for internal teams. They're not, and yet most of us, when we're operating within in the Foresight space, or even more generally in the insight space, you're actually operating in a network, right? Those tools are not designed for that. They're designed for an internal team that's homogeneous. They're not designed for a network that is heterogeneous, and how you manage those sorts of things. So, that has been something that's been top of mind for me for some time. In fact, coming out of my master's degree, University of Houston, in Foresight, which was focused on collaborative foresight, actually, specifically, was where the idea for the Open Foresight Hub came from. So that was one of the platforms, one of the early platforms built. And the idea there was, we need to break down the castle walls that sit around corporations, right? Foresight is done within them. This is not healthy. We are missing many perspectives. How do we actually essentially decolonize, right, and create a platform that is owned by no one, really, at the end of the day, where different perspectives can be shared? And so that was sort of a first effort. I actually left SAP just recently to create another platform that's also similar in the space, but where in fact actually the intent is to say, how do you bring all of the actors into a platform? And what does that look like for an organization? How do you do that in a way that you have to respect privacy and intellectual property? You have to allow sharing, but in controlled ways, and allow for the flow of information and insights, through that kind of platform. So fundamentally, I actually think we have a platform problem, that's holding back the ability to practice this very much, in the physical space, if you like, in workshops and elsewhere. So.
That must be quite a fine line to balance. So, if you're breaking down the castle walls, trying to extend access and inclusion for a corporation whose bottom line is likely profit.
Yep.
And how do you avoid being extractive? Like what? That's difficult.
Yeah, it is. And so that's actually why, the Open Foresight Hub was designed in a way that it was completely owned. I mean, SAP paid for it, but from the start, I designed it in a way that SAP could never come back and own it, to be very transparent. And so that platform's designed in a way that it's intended never to be extractive, right? Everyone benefits from the platform. Who contributes, they benefit in whatever format they want. The platform we're building now could be extractive in a way, right? In the sense that, in your traditional, it's not intended, you know what I mean? That's not the intent. Sure. But, for a lot of corporations, like at SAP, and we were spending millions of dollars on research of various sorts. And the reality is we hired lots of agencies and external vendors to do that work. And so we would bring that information in. We wouldn't necessarily push it back out, right? That is that's a sort of a natural bent of organizations. It's on the individuals running those organizations to make sure it's not extractive. So what we were doing when I was there, the foresight work we were doing, we were being very deliberate that whoever participated in a foresight project got to benefit. Whoever it was, didn't matter. All of the research was shared freely and made available to them. So I think that's I'm not sure how you solve a problem like that, other than making it completely free and available. Like the Open Foresight Hub, how you solve that kind of problem. You're depending on people, to make sure it's not extractive.
Gotcha. Thanks, and thanks for being so frank. And sorry, it was a bit of a tough one.
I'm no longer at SAP, so I can be very transparent.
All right, so let's take a hop, skip, and a jump over to the Foresight directory, if I may, Geci. Sure. So, all right, how does the Foresight directory lower those barriers to resources, invite the audience to join in, to learn, to participate, and create futures? What does that look like for you?
So what we're trying to do with the Foresight for Development, I guess platform, for lack of a better word, platform could mean many things. What we're trying to do there is to build communities of practice, first of all, that can just try different things. And that becomes really important because I think it creates more democratized space for people to try and valorize other methods, other ways of doing things, to share experiences, and to share them in a way also that's not just concentrated, whether it's among the experts or the moneyed or the whomever, but in a way lower those barriers of entry, so to speak. One of the things we also did in very early days of Foresight for Development, and I know this is controversial in this space, was to say that you also don't have dominion over who gets to call themselves a practitioner in the space. So many people think about the future in many different ways, and in a way you don't get to say who doesn't have a say. And so we allowed anybody to profile themselves, but if you're going to say you're a futurist or a foresight practitioner, just tell us how, and that's good enough. So for us, that kind of radical inclusion was very important because it meant everybody had a place, but you did have to state, what are you doing in this space? If you've got ways and means or ideas, well, what are those that allow you to say, I am a futurist, or I'm a futurist thinker, or I'm a foresight practitioner, or whatever term they chose to use. So I think lowering barriers, I think creating shared commons for knowledge, for practice, for data, I think that's really important to us. I think the issue of whether it's completely open or closed, there are lots of issues there because obviously somebody's funding something somewhere, so it always comes down to that, how do you actually sustain it? I think we've got different cultures that create other opportunities for that, and this is coming up a lot actually in the age of AI, just as we think about data and how data moves. To some extent, I think that's relevant for us in the future space because there is a question of value and how people see value and how people share value, and I think there are different cultures of that. It's not only a commodified culture of I'll only give it to you if you pay for it. Sometimes I'll give it to you just because I think you're worth giving it to. And those are difficult to understand, I think, within certain ontologies, but I think what's beautiful about diversity is we could learn from other ways. And so some of the data commons ideas that are coming up, some of the new data cooperative ideas that are coming up, for example, are about saying that this could actually work. And I'm very excited about that because I think part of the challenge with just saying open is sometimes it ignores the issue of who pays. And I think we are beginning to evolve some other ways of thinking about this.
No, and I really liked what you, and this is something that we try and do over at the UN Futures Lab. And actually, so my mum keeps asking me what I do for a living, and she's been asking it for about 18 years. Sometimes she's satisfied, sometimes she's not. And in this particular job, the only way that I can explain my role is to help get what's in people's heads out of their heads, right? Like we're all human beings. We've always thought about the future. We've always used lots of different signals and insights to tell us, the color of the sky at night, direction that birds are flying in, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really liked it when you said that because I think that's really what our job is, isn't it? Not to say, well, I'm not a foresight expert. I would never dream of labeling myself that. But lots of people do, and with good reason. But I think that the previous panel they were talking about 8 billion foresight practitioners around the world, and I think that that's something that we need to remind ourselves of in this space quite a lot, isn't it? So I really appreciated what you were saying there, Geci. James, all right, let's talk about tools, practice, methodologies, UK government. Where do collaborative foresight efforts work in government? You can frame this as lessons learned in designing foresight processes. You work for government. Politics changes a lot. Things need to survive different angles and different perspectives and so on and so forth. You've got a really tough job. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you. Just pick up on one point. I think another benefit of collaboration and foresight is you get people engaged who the AI won't be trained on. So if you want to use, in the last session they were talking about using AI to generate scenarios, you can definitely do that. But again, the risk is that you don't hear from people that haven't fed the AI with their data. So if you can bring people into the conversation, the AI's not marginalized voices, underrepresented groups, brilliant. It's a great argument for collaboration over artificial generation. And if you are a good facilitator and you can get things out of people's head the AI isn't trained on, that's your value add as a human. Otherwise, get the AI to do the work for you. Right? In terms of government, I think think you've obviously got, in democracies, you've got cycles. And perhaps the appetite for longer-term thinking might shift. And that's the reality of democracies around the world. And to be honest, not just democracies, to be honest. I think there's a lot of countries facing sort of pressures. And over recent years, there's been a lot going on around the world, global conflicts. I think there's been, obviously COVID. Someone said to me the other day that it used to be that you'd walk between meetings, and since COVID, you just click straight onto the next one. So you miss out on that thinking time between meetings. And actually, I said right at the start that the challenge is getting action. It's not doing the analysis. It's not finding out. The challenge is getting action. The most senior people, the people who are most empowered to act on the future, are the busiest people. So you've got to, making space for them to be collaborative, definitely. I think to a degree also, the media drives that, drives some of those cycles. Elections drive some of those cycles. Expectations of different groups drive some of that short-termist pressure on government. I think where I see collaboration working really well in Foresight, but it's actually multilateral level. You've got times when countries can agree on longer-term things, and it's easier for them to agree on longer-term things than things that are near, because it's less, it's further into the future. It's easier to. So you think about like Montreal Protocol, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, for example. Countries agreeing on long-term targets, and actually those commitments meant other countries didn't seek nuclear weapons because there'd been this agreement on a longer-term debt. So I think sometimes collaboration and foresight opens the door for negotiation and diplomacy to a degree really well. I think that part of the way you solve that challenge of short-termism in governments around the world might be with the collaboration and the engagement of citizens with foresight, because that's going to help you address some of the trust problem if you're listening more to people in your country. But it also raises awareness of some of these longer-term issues in your countries. And you need that because you want to make political room for governments to be able to act longer-term. But the public needs a certain level of understanding about some long-term challenges if they're going to give you the opportunity to do that, to do short-term pain for long-term gain. I also think there's we've been doing a little bit of work with our parliament to sort of encourage more scrutiny with the long term, is sort of holding a bit more accountability for people in government, asking them about the long term. And I think that's certain countries do that really well. It's like Finland, they've introduced more kind of external accountability. There's great examples, I'm sure people have heard them in the last week from around the world, of countries that are experimenting with different methods to try and introduce more accountability and change that short-termist cycle, where you have everybody thinks the person they're accountable to is more short-termist than they are, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
All right. So follow-up question for you, and then I'm gonna ask something similar of Geci and David. So all right, how do you turn these collaborative foresight processes into actual decisions that change societies?
So I think, I mentioned earlier that senior people have the least amount of time.
Yep.
So the biggest bit of advice I would give is if you can make time at those senior meetings where those people sit around and are talking, you can offer them something that they are interested in. You're going where the energy is in government or in wherever organisation you work, and you talk to them about whatever issue it is, or you get them discussing whatever issue it is, and then you ask, what are you going to do now? And then in asking that question, you generate action. It's like, you're going where the energy is, you're making time for people to discuss it, if you've got that level of empowerment and space to do that. And you're asking, how do we move this forward? What do you want to do? And I said, often, people are really receptive to that. One of the first things I did when I started in my job 4 years ago was look at annual horizon scanning. So every year, we'll look at the year ahead. And then, we never struggled to get people interested in that item on their board meetings. Let's have a chat about the year ahead. And you make space for it. And it's also, it's quite, it makes it predictable that they know that's coming and that they can engage with it. And it becomes an annual event. So I think a bit of predictability, consistency, we get people engaging with it, from now, from sort of November, December time. You don't want to start your horizon scan too early because quite a lot changes by January. But I would say that it's working out how you're going to influence those stakeholders and what they care about, and then making space for them to discuss it.
We often get, it's that, you get one or two things, well, you get lots of things, don't you? What am I talking about? But one of the things we get is, we follow that example, right? And we try and get where the energy is.
Yeah.
And then we say, well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you get like the panicked, oh God, we have to do something about this. And you're like, well, it's obviously your prerogative, but ideally you would. And sometimes you get that kind of that panic. And sometimes, and then they say, we want you to kind of give us a few, be a bit more prescriptive. Like, tell us what you think we should do. And that's the space I'm not getting into. Because as soon as you get into that space, then you get too prescriptive and you get told that's not your domain. You're here to help us with the insights. And I can appreciate the different approaches, because decision makers do have very little time. The complexity and the complicatedness and the pressure sometimes politically that people have. Our brains are just not designed for this level of complexity, are we? But David, let's talk to you, private sector. Examples of how we can turn collaborative foresight into decisions. Where has that worked really well in your
Great question. And it's a huge challenge. Similar. I mean, I think the challenge is very similar in the private sector to the public sector in terms of, you've got decision makers that don't have time, aren't necessarily bought into the process, and somehow you're trying to influence them. Anyway, that's probably like a whole session in and of itself, how to deal with that. Yeah. Where we tended to find success was at the product level, to be honest. Right. Because often they were looking at product strategy, is a future-oriented thing. Right? It's like, I need to make a decision about where the market's going to be in the next X amount of time. And whether this is the right investment to make. And so, so that is where we tended to have the most success, to be honest. Now, collaborative models were very powerful to actually sort of driving influence. So, which gets to some of the challenges with decision makers, right? So you have a confidence issue, and you have a time issue with them. And so the way we would, we actually try to attack it in a number of different approaches. But often the approach we would take would be to say, look, ideally the decision maker's in the process. Then they experience it, they see the value of it, you know what I mean? But clearly they don't have the time. And so what we would do then is say, well, let's find a proxy. Who is someone that decision maker really trusts? So that and bring them into the process. So then when we got to presenting the findings, they would obviously look to the person that they trusted, and if that person was nodding their head, they'd be like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So you were using, not manipulating, because you still needed to make sure the process is right, but you're sort of breaking down some of those barriers around, like, do I trust what they're saying and where they're coming from? One of the other approaches that we worked on was we came up with, we called them insight conversations. And so it's like a mini workshop that you could run in 45 minutes with a decision maker. And so the idea here was, if I present something to you, if I say something to you, you might be like, yeah, okay, that's nice. Or if it's something fairly radical and different, you'll be skeptical. In fact, you need to hear it multiple times before you actually sort of come around to it. You don't have multiple times to say something to a decision maker. So we came up with a methodology that said, actually, we're just going to show you some of the insights, and then we're going to step you through a process where you come to your own moment of insight, where you've taken some of the material we put together, some of the trends and the issues and those sorts of things, but then they have to internalize that into what this means for them and how they would apply it into the problem space. We found that fairly successful, actually, as an approach. So anyway.
Fantastic. Thanks for those examples. Brilliant. Geci, talk us, what does this look like? Getting the decisions to be made in ways that are informed by collaborative foresight processes, sitting where you do between so many different power dynamics. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What's been your experience?
The word that's coming to mind is guerrilla tactics. Don't let them know what you're doing.
Go for it.
No, and I think it is a bit of that, because I'm thinking specifically of two examples. Actually, my collaborator Teresh is here, and both of these have involved him. One was working, so the two examples I'll use are between local governments, who I think are incredibly important, because they're so close to the issue that they can't, the politics are too close to be vague or to be abstract and for time not to matter. And so to me, it's a very important level from a public sector perspective at which to engage. And so we did a few years ago something we called visualization studios, and what that was bringing some of them into working with actual communities on not you coming and having a public consultation about what do people want and then you write a laundry list and do nothing, but was really to say, do people actually have ideas about what they're wanting to do? And it's not ideas about this political term and what road we're going to build or what building gets put up first. It's longer term questions about what are we doing, and not just as a set of political priorities, but as priorities of aesthetic, priorities of care, priorities of how do we want to be with each other. And that was really interesting and to me quite powerful, not just because it came up with beautiful and interesting ideas and things, but because in fact politicians and administrators are in this space, and I think changing of minds is one of the most important things we could do. I think people ignore that often for some of these people, at least in our context and in office, they're bombarded with development visions that come from usually the corporate sector, from people with actual development, meaning physical development interests or other kinds of interests. They're not often bombarded with anything other than demands from the citizenry. So they're bombarded with imaginaries from the citizenry about what they actually want that doesn't look like a list of demands and expectations, but that looks like something compelling, something that actually sounds like something you want to be part of, and there is a way to do that. So I think that was just one example. The second one is something that I think especially in many urban spaces has become common, which is highly contested issues, contested sites or contested developments, and we were quite a number in our parts, and recently we used a speculative design process combined with futuring to actually bring various stakeholders together, not to solve the issue, and in fact for me the success was what appeared to be perhaps something where you are facilitating a decision about what we will then build. And in fact, Teresh developed some beautiful visions, but they're not about building anything. They were just about how we understand space and our relationships as the government person, as the developer, as the academic, as the artist, as the person who lives in the neighborhood, as the person who drives through the neighborhood. And it moved from being about what do we build on this site to being about what do we do next on this site. And in fact, what's emerged from that, from what I hear, I hope nothing has changed, is in fact they're developing some experiential ideas, some activations. Actually, nothing is being built. And I think that's a wonderful outcome because it ceased being about whose thing was going to be built to what does this space mean for us, actually, with all of our different interests. And the people we were most worried about actually was the government people, because I think in that kind of a context, it's most difficult for them because they're a property holder and they're a decision holder among all of these different interests. So everybody's looking to them and they don't want to be put in a difficult position. But I think this space, they became active participants and not just decision makers. And I think that was also beautiful to see. So I think we can use foresight in ways that also doesn't diminish contestation, but perhaps transforms it into something more important.
Love it. Fantastic. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna turn it over to you all in the audience. And so if you've got questions for our panelists, please think about those questions in the next 15 to 20 seconds. And then we're going to be, and then if you've got questions, just raise your hand, and we will select you, and a microphone will arrive from either the right or the left, and you can ask your questions. And then we're going to ask our panelists to round us off with some thoughts on what do we need to do next to keep this space for collaborative foresight. Is that all right with you all?
Sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So hands, please. Who's got a hand up? And yeah, there's a lady in the last row next to the railing up there. Yeah, wave your hand. There you go. Microphone coming to you. And if you could just let us know your name and your question. The floor is yours.
My name is Noreen, and I come from a small island state, the Maldives, that most of us will know as beautiful, but also we're at the front lines of climate impact, I suppose. When we think about foresight and futures, and as I've been listening to these beautiful conversations, I suppose there's a balance of economic reality, and also the control that we have on dependence on certain areas. And how, I guess the question is, how do you imagine futures when there's reality on the natural environment? And if I can just take 1 to 2 seconds to share, when most of you will remember there was news articles last June in summer when there was heat waves in the UK, and that made national or international news. But what didn't make international news was that also coincided with the largest coral bleaching event in the Maldives as well. So these are not things that we have control over nationally. So how do we kind of ground the realities, I guess, on the vulnerabilities that we're facing and amplify that and what's happening and how interconnected we are, at the same time balance what we have to do to survive in small states like ours? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question and for sharing. This one, James, you're going to take it.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
So how do you sort of balance the realities with the ideal, or with hypotheticals? Yeah? The global control.
Global impact. Oh, sorry. Global impact of, I guess, climate, that we're facing the global action impact in our areas, and then how do we balance economic reality, because we can't, the coral bleaching event is all of us around the world.
Yeah.
So how do we survive economically when we can't control that, I guess? Yeah.
I think there's, it's trade-offs, isn't it? It's like long-term trade-offs, and I completely agree. I completely hear what you're saying. I think you have, there are trade-offs that a lot of countries around the world are making between economics and climate, and economics and national security. I can't comment on I can't comment on a lot of aspects of this. I think that there, what does the system incentivize? This is maybe the question to flip back. I think when we try and engage people on the long term, there are different ways you can do it. You can engage people in terms of legacy, as in let's think about the long term, let's think about the legacy we're leaving here. Or you can engage people in terms of economics, and actually it might even be a saving to acting on this now as opposed to acting on it later. Or you can engage it in terms of, there's different ways to sell it. Sometimes you might take something that's short term, like flooding or a climate event, and you say, actually, that then opens the door to have conversations about wider themes of climate change. Or you might take, a question around migration and then open it up into discussions around demographic change. So sometimes you might want to take something where there is energy and then build up and out in order to widen the conversation and to talk about the bigger, longer-term issues. I think that's about as diplomatic as I can be.
Perfect. Thank you for being voluntold. Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Gustavo. I'm visiting from Brazil, and I wanted to first say what an honor it is to see Geci in person. I've followed her work many times from afar. My question is, our common house, the Earth, has many issues to face right now if we want to get to the future as a human society, a global human society. And many times we need to cooperate with organizations or groups which don't share the same initial thoughts that we do. So how to hold the space for collaboration under those circumstances?
Great question. Geci, can I ask you for that one? No? Well, I am.
Don't do it. No, I'm kidding. I think this is where, I guess we can call it facilitation, but maybe even go further to calling it stewardship. Because there's a difference between having a conversation about the future where I think the desire is to control and then to get people to own, and it's very kind of, pull and push, and therefore it begins to appear like we have to like each other and we have to agree on things. And I think if we see foresight as a form of stewardship that allows for something a bit more pluriversal, I know your work too, to happen, I think maybe that's the thing we can do. Because I do think that inevitably, for many of the reasons, including the comment just now from the Maldives, I think we find ourselves in very difficult conversations where I think increasingly we're not going to agree. I mean, we always make it, we like this feel-good thing, like, oh, we all agree on where we're trying to go. No, actually, sometimes we don't. you know, and that's a difficult thing to be honest about. But then it means that in a way we are, I guess, gardening. You know, it's something different from kind of trying to force people into anything or pretending that we have to agree on everything.
Thank you. Thank you. And sorry we didn't have more time for questions. That's absolutely my fault, so please blame me. 10 seconds each. What do we need to do next to keep collaborative foresight meaningful? David?
First off, you know, you should collaborative first, in my opinion. Everything should be that way. And it really comes down to, you know, aligning on the problem, confidence in the process, and curating the people.
Nice.
That's really what you want to do.
Thank you. James, 10 seconds.
I would say there's a phrase we use, which is that the process is the product. So sometimes if your aim is to write a report, if you engage people along the way, the report might not matter because the change might have happened before the report gets done. So the process is the product. Secondly is go where the energy is. And thirdly, I would say just be really entrepreneurial with it. And yeah.
Fantastic. Geci?
I'm going to steal those. So steward, trust, experiment. I think have an appetite for risk because you're going to have to if you want to collaborate.
They have been a fantastic panel and you have been a fantastic audience. So I would like us all to just give each other a round of applause. And to say thank you for having this space and this time together to talk about foresight in these ways. Thanks to the Dubai Futures Forum. I hope you have fantastic rests of your forum together and fantastic journeys home. Thank you very much.